Good morning. My name is Dick Polich. I'm the founder and the owner of Polich TALLIX, a fine art foundry in the United States. How I got into this business, I have to go back to the beginning. And I want to tell you that I am a first generation American. My parents were both born in Yugoslavia, and they ended up in Chicago, and I lived in a bilingual community. There were lots of Croatian people around, and you want to talk to the older people, you have to speak Croatian. And my whole life, I can remember they would gather around the table after supper and drink coffee and stuff, and they would tell stories about coming to America and getting to New York City and not knowing the language and not having any money. And so my life as a child was filled with these romantic stories of adventure and whatever. So it made me decide that I was going to have an adventuresome life too. And so when I went to high school, and I went to high school in a big suburban high school in Chicago, and there were 4,000 students, and we played football, and I was a very good football player and a pretty good student. And I was going to go to Notre Dame or to Northwestern University, and a man showed up one day and said, "Hey kid, you want to go to Yale?" And I didn't know where Yale was, but I knew what to say. I said, "Yes, I want to go to Yale." And I took the test and the interviews and all that, and I got into Yale. So that was 1950, and when I went to Yale, I had never been on a train.
When you first showed up, had you been there previously while you were? So was it what you expected? Were you? I mean, what was your first impression? Was it?
My first impression was that I was lonely. I mean, and what happened is that I didn't, they asked, "Do you have roommates?" Because people went to prep, so I didn't have any roommates. And so they stuck me with two guys who had come from very fancy English prep schools, and they didn't show up until the day classes started, And so I was there 2 weeks before the classes because football practice started, whatever. And so when they finally got there, it was like they were from a different country than I was. It was really, but I had the football team, and I was elected captain of the freshman football team, and I really was off.
So you were making an impression early on, obviously, to get elected captain of the football team, right? You were impressive.
Freshman football.
For freshman team, all right.
Okay. I worked in the cafeteria. You have to work in the cafeteria. You got a scholarship, and they don't care if you play football or not. That was not part of the deal. And so I got to know people, and part of the story is that I fell in love with art, and I went to Yale to be an engineer because engineers made money, and that's what I was going to Yale for. And so I transferred out of engineering, and I was just really wild, and then I was elected into Skull and Bones, and I was an All-East football player, and I had a whole bunch of things. It was a good
Skull and Bones. That was sort of like a big deal, right?
Big deal.
Weren't all some of the very famous people in there?
Very big.
Were you surprised to be, or were you invited? How did that work?
You get invited.
So you were actually making quite an impression, I guess.
Well, you can. I mean, certainly I was working very hard, and I was going to try to be a successful guy. So then I graduated, and here I am, the adventurer. Okay, and I had a great adventure at Yale. And I go to work for somebody. I worked for them for 3 years.
Where was it when you left Yale? Where did you go to work, and about what year was this now?
This is 1954, and I went to work. There was a company, a big American company, that also gave me a scholarship. Yale had prize scholarships, and I got a prize scholarship from these guys. and I worked for them between my my junior and senior year, and I went to work for them.
And this was New York City or where?
Well, it was outside of New York City.
Okay.
It was in, first of all, in the Mahwah, New Jersey region, and then in a little plant outside of Buffalo, New York, where we made big castings and things like that. And as I said, I worked for them for 3 years, and there was very little that I could match up to what my parents had talked about adventure in life, okay? And so I said to myself, what am I going to do? And I said, I'm going to fly jet airplanes. And so I quit my job and I joined the Navy. And I went in the Navy and got my wings and landed.
Now, you went into the Navy specifically to be a pilot, and
Yes.
that was the understanding. So you had an agreement.
You had to qualify.
You're qualified.
I
so-
mean, and you know, Yale is an extraordinary group of people, but you then take and go into the aviation end of the Navy, and you are with the cream of the crop of American men, okay? Then there were no women around in those days. And so it was a very elite group. And we learned how to fly, and it was between the Korean and the Vietnam War, so I didn't have much danger of being shot down or anything like that. And then suddenly my time was up, 3.5 years was gone, and I had to do something else.
So you obviously made a decision. You didn't want a career in the military.
Being in the Navy and flying was wonderful. Well, flying was wonderful. Being in the Navy wasn't so hot.
Okay.
And so I said to myself, I mean, I really like going to school. Okay, so I said to myself, I want to be an architect. And I asked around, and Harvard had the best architecture school. And so I put my uniform and my wings, and I went into the admissions office, and I said, grabbed the guy by the collar and said, I want to be an architect. And they let me in, and it's just amazing. There I was, and I have to say, after a year, I found out I'm not an architect, and I really had to leave. I didn't know what to do. I had a friend, though, that I had met who was teaching at MIT. So I go to him, and he's running the casting and solidification group of Foundry, experimental Foundry at MIT. And I tell him that this is what I'm doing, and I'm not doing that well, and it doesn't work. And he looked at me and said, why don't you come work here? It was between the Korean and the Vietnam War, and a foundry guy from MIT, you make airplane parts and weapon systems. That's what you do with high-tech foundry business. And he had found out that there were lots of big sculptures being made in Italy and all over the place coming to America. And so he went to the Ford Foundation and got a grant to study making sculpture. And there I was, and I went to work in the laboratory. I took a course, I got an A, I took a course, and suddenly it's 3 years later, I got a master's degree in metallurgy. So where do I go? I go to a foundry, the IBM foundry, where they're making airplane parts and weapon systems. And I quickly got to be the general manager of the place.
How old were you at this point?
25. 26.
So you've already had quite a bit of experience at 26.
Yeah. And so I go to work, and as I did very well in this foundry in New Jersey, and we made weapon systems and airplane parts. And then I'm the general manager, and every day I got a piece of paper that says what's been ordered. And I'm looking at the orders, and there's an order on the list for 5,000 gas mask valves, okay? And I looked at that, and I thought for a minute, and I closed the book and said, I'm going to do something else with my engineering, and I quit my job, and I went out and started walking around Boston. I found the guy in the Hudson Valley that I'd gone to MIT with, who was living there, and he had a business, he gave me space and he had a foundry. He gave me space, and I started walking around the streets of New York and getting names, knocking on doors, and I made my first art castings, and that is now 1960, something like that.
Now, each of these adventures, I mean, you didn't sort of have, did you have some kind of master plan about your life, or it was just like, you know,
The
chapter to chapter?
master plan was that I was going to try to match the adventure that I had heard about from my family,
Gotcha.
about what life was about. And so I went around and I found artists, and they gave me work to do, and I started making sculpture, and in a year.
Now, where was your location, and what year was that?
Cold Spring, New York.
Cold Spring, New York. And the year then would be?
It would be like 54, 57, 60, 62, something like that, yeah. And I went to my friend and said, hey, you got to give me more space. He said, hey, we don't have any more space for you. And I said, well, then I'm moving. And so I moved into another space and started.
Were you very successful at first, gaining the attention of artists? Was it difficult?
I was different, because most foundries are industrial guys who really aren't metallurgists or scientists, and they go and they learn how to make castings, and they go make castings. And I was maybe the only guy that I never met anyone else from MIT who was making art castings, and I could go in and talk about the metal and about this and that, and the artists loved it, okay? And so.
How were you early on? How were you finding artists? Were you going to certain places, or were you
knocking on doors?
No, he said just knocking on doors.
I go to openings.
I got you.
You know, it was just, and I've always been personable, and you know, say, hey, I want to make your casting. The guy would say, what do you want? and so by 1985, I was in 100,000 square feet, and we had 188 people working in the foundry. And then what happened? Two guys from London showed up, and they said they wanted to make an art conglomerate. And they were business guys, but they had two art foundries in England, one in London and one in upper part of England.
Just back up just a moment.
Yeah.
Now, you had 188, so you grew rather rapidly, right?
Yeah, I grew very
So you obviously you got a reputation among artists, and they felt you were giving a superior. What do you think was?
There's no one around.
It's just because you were doing specifically for artists. And you understood them.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was giving engineering information and talking to them about, you know, how strong it could be, or what it was, and all different alloys and all kinds of things. And so anyway, these guys come in, and I say, okay, they want me to run all three foundries, and they've got Europe covered, and I've got America covered, and I said, okay, let's do it. So, I mean, there I was. First week of every month, I'd get on a jet airplane and fly to London, and then go see the two foundries in England, and then I'd come back and work in New York for 3 weeks. And everything was going gangbusters, and then suddenly the stock market thing of '88 happened. And I get a call from London, and they say, we're selling the foundry. We don't have any money. And I said, you can't sell the foundry? And it's my foundry. And I said, you got to give me a week, and I'll try to raise some money. So, you know some Wall Street guys and whatever. And I found 4 guys, and we bought the foundry back, okay? The difference was that before I owned 96% of the foundry, and now I own 34% of the foundry. And Wall Street guys, being Wall Street guys, they really know everything about everything. And I lasted about 1.5 years, and I said, you guys take my foundry and stick it somewhere. I'm going to do something. So, I mean, it was just, it was really crazy. These guys were going to try to tell me how to run the art foundry. And I just couldn't do it, and I just walked out, and I came over here. I found this place, and
Now, when you say this place, you mean right here, this place?
Right here, this place, and it was empty, and there was no building on the other side over there, and I went to a guy named Frank Stella, who's a big name, and I said, hey Frank, and I'd made sculpture for him, and I said, here's what I want to do, and so he funded me. Okay, we were partners, Frank Stella and I, and this was just a big open building, and I took first this area here, and then I closed in the wall over there, and we really did pretty good together. But what happened is, after about 3 years of being Frank's partner, I go to an opening in New York City, and these two artists are talking, and one says to the other guy, where do you get your stuff cast? And the guy said, oh, I'm using Frank Stella's foundry. And I said to myself, what? So the next day I talked to Frank and said, hey Frank, I got to buy you out. I didn't say this to him, but I said to myself, I do not have on my tombstone that I was Frank Stella's foundry guy. So I did that, and then one of the joyous things about working here, we have about 90 people. Over 80% of them have been here more than 20 years. 10 of them have been retired from 65 to 75, and they're still working even though they're on pension.
And what do you attribute that interest in staying with you?
I attribute it to the fact that there is something primal about people making things with their hands, okay? And artists, that's part of the important thing about art, is making things. And we can be, you know, engineering, and we can be techies, but we're not artists. We're craftspeople, and we know how to do things beautifully, and we make them. The other thing about being a craftsman is that when you get to be a really good craftsman, and you get done with a job, and you look at it, you can judge it yourself, and you can say, yes, that's a good job, and I'm done with it, or no, I got to go back and fix that, or fix this, or whatever. And that satisfaction of seeing what you've made with your hands, and then knowing in your heart that you did it really well. It's primal. It's just an important part of life, and so people can't imagine working somewhere else. I was getting, by then, I'm now going to be 85. And I was like 10 years ago, and I said, I got to find some way to keep this place going. And I looked and looked and looked, and I found Adam, and who is just a terrific guy, and really loves the thing. And everything is, for me, was put in its place. I am 50 years older than Adam. and he's going to go from here to the next step. And so we needed our own building. I was still renting, and so we bought a place down 4 miles from here, and we're already moving in, and we've got 30 acres of land, and so we've got great plans, and that's the story.
Not suburban.
So what would you say you know now that's different, or your experience that different than when you walked into Yale all those years ago? Do you have the same exact view of life, or has it changed, or any of your views towards anything? Has it been a learning experience that's changed you?
Well, I mean, I love school. I went to Yale, Harvard, MIT. I flew airplanes. I love to learn things. And in this business, I learn something every day. And if I like you, I'll teach you something every day. Okay?
That's what it's count.
What's that?
That's what it's count.
That's,
Let me say it a different way.
Yeah.
Knowing what you know now,
Yeah.
if you were back 18, 19, 20, would you have lived your life any differently? Knowing what you know now, would you have done anything differently, do you think?
yeah, I mean, without even hesitating. I mean, I was so wrapped up in myself and trying to find something that I felt was worth doing. That I you know, I know I'm a bright guy, and I work hard, and I'm really very motivated, and the result of that search of working, you know, 14 hours a day, and Sundays it was just another work day. I really was a failure as a father.
So you would have sort of altered your work personal balance if knowing what you know now, you would have spent less time at work, or what?
I was dedicated to doing something, and
So all things said, you're happy with the results. You're happy where things are now when you're approaching 85.
I'm very proud of this, but I'm aware that I mean, I did what I did because
Not many people can do what you did.
I know that, but I did it because my family taught me how important it was to work, how important it was to be honest, how important it was to be clean. You know, I learned things, and they pushed me out of the door when I was 18 and I went to Yale. But I knew that I was loved and supported, and that I knew how to behave with a group of people, and I just had a lot of personal things that I got from my mother and father. My father would have been a great engineer. He could make anything, fix anything with his hands. My mother was so smart and always helping people and always being, you know, and so that's what I went to Yale with, and I said, I'm good enough to be here, and I'm going to do what I can. And it was they gave me the courage to say, no, I don't want to do this, I'm going to do something else. And
Yeah.
I don't know.
Do you have any, as far as Adam and the Foundry goes, do you envision its future? Have you sort of tried to give him a view of how you see the next 10, 20, 30 years? Or put it another way, I mean, obviously as the person who you were relying on to carry on, what have you tried to instill in him?
I have tried to be fair and open and to respect him as his person. Adam is not me, and I don't want him to be me, and it would be a disaster if I tried to make him be me. And we are friends, you know, we are friends. I'm very careful that if Adam's in the group and he talks, I don't interrupt, I don't correct him, he's the boss. And my job is he's not a Foundry guy, but he's very, very bright. And he's very personable, and he works hard, and he's terrific.
So you're comfortable, you made the right decision in choosing him. What was it that attracted you to him in terms of you knew you wanted to hire him to?
Well, just his whole persona, his openness, his experience, the things he tells, when he talks to you and tells you stories about, they're interesting, they're true, they're valuable. So he's just...
Okay. Any final words? Any final comments?
I'm going to say it out loud, that I want to try to get in touch with my children and getting closer. And there's not much time, and I got to do it, and I'm going to do it and see if we can have, I can't have many years left, but at least I could share with them that I know that as a father I was not as good.
All right, good stuff.